I think it goes without saying that one of the worst pains a person can feel in their average lifespan is breaking a bone. Arm bone, leg bone, finger bone, even the smallest bone can cause unimaginable discomfort and at least soreness and pain. There's a difference between a hairline fracture and a full-on breakage of the bone, the latter of which causes the most pain. Still, the pain of breaking a bone really only lasts a short while after the initial fracture, and we end up recovering. But what if it didn't end there? What if your bone is continuously broken over and over and over again without any stopping or time to let it heal? To many, it sounds like a twisted horror story, but for one, Thad Phillips, it was a real-world nightmare. Our story today takes place in Wisconsin, the city of Baraboo, in 1994. Here lived Chris Steiner, a 14-year-old who worked a regular job at the nearby McDonald's. As is usual for anyone who works in the morning, Chris went to bed early like he always did. However, the next morning around 6 a.m., when Chris's parents went to wake him, he wasn't there. They must have thought he had already left for work, but when they headed downstairs, they were met with an alarming sight. A screen door had been broken open, muddy footprints across the floor, and the front door was unlocked. His parents initially believed Chris's friends had snuck into the house and woken him up in order for them to sneak out early. But the day passed, afternoon came, and Chris was still not home. Understandably, after a while, Chris's parents reported the boy as missing. It was strange because there was no sign of Chris having been forcefully taken, yet there was no reason for him to run away. 7 days later, 2 jet skiers found the bloated, rotted corpse of Chris near a river. Coroners had no way of telling whether he died accidentally, or via suicide, or if someone else had done this. The only thing they were sure of is he had died via drowning. 1 year later, in 1995, 13-year-old Thad Phillips and his parents moved into Baraboo. One night, Thad is asleep on the couch when he suddenly felt someone gently grab him and lift him off the couch and begin to carry him. Thinking it was one of his parents, he slowly opened his eyes, and who he saw was not his mom or dad. It was a teenage boy he had never seen before. It was 17-year-old Joe Clark. Once Joe and Thad were outside, Joe puts Thad down on his feet and tells him to run to his house, and for some inexplicable reason, Thad agrees to run towards the house of an older teenage boy who had just kidnapped him. When they eventually reach his home, it's apparent Joe does not look after himself, his abode filled with a rancid display of garbage and junk. Naturally, Thad begins to become visibly uncomfortable. Perhaps he's finally fully woken up and realizes what is happening. But Joe persuades the boy to stay, on the account of a supposed party he plans to throw. Joe then begins listing the accurate names of Thad's real-life friends, assuring him they would arrive soon. Thad agrees to stay. A while later, Joe leads Thad up to an upstairs bedroom. As soon as they arrive, Joe suddenly grabs Thad and pushes him onto the bed, jumping on top of him. He firmly grips Thad's leg and begins to twist to one side of him, as the boy begins to yell in discomfort until a loud, sharp crack fills the room and Thad's ankle dangles limply. Now, filled with sudden adrenaline, Thad leaps from the bed, quickly shambling away from Joe and out of the room, heading down the stairs with surprising speed for someone with a shattered ankle. But the breakaway was short-lived, for the older boy would eventually catch him halfway. From here, he carries the boy to the couch, to which he once again climbs onto him and begins to brutally beat and whip at him with his bare hands. Manhandling the same leg with the abused ankle, he begins to fold it towards his chest, lifting himself up and crashing down onto his leg with enough brute force to break the hip bone with an even louder crack, like mangled tree bark. He carries the boy back up to the same bedroom where he began, and there he would continue to rain torment down on his legs, pulling, twisting, bending, finagling his shattered legs with the finesse of the most sadistic ballet. Joe was intent on keeping Thad in this position for as long as possible. Naturally, the screams and wails of the boy became grating to him, so he stuffed a towel into his mouth. But suddenly something switched within Joe, and he suddenly began to mend Thad's tortured legs, putting multiple layers of white socks over them in a sloppy makeshift attempt at a cast. He carries the boy down to the couch and the two begin to watch TV. Joe speaking to Thad as if nothing had happened, as if the two were simply good friends hanging out. Joe began to explain with polite bluntness how much the sound of shattered bones was a sexual high for him, even going so far as to attempt to break his own bones once, but naturally he could not. Not because it was too painful, but because he simply could not find the correct angle. It was clear to Thad how much the sight of his own broken bones sexually aroused Joe. Occasionally he masturbated right in front of him, staring at his legs. He placed Thad's destroyed legs in leg braces and forced him to hobble around, feebly. At some point, Joe would drop the friendly facade and begin to suffocate Thad with a pillow, multiple times but never till death. Hours passed, and Joe had to leave the house for something. He hauled Thad up in the bedroom, on the bed, and he leaves. With two shattered legs, ankles, and a hip bone, Thad lifts himself from the bed and crawls off and out of the room. He is faced with the flight of stairs leading down to his only exit, so he throws himself down, unfortunately knocking himself unconscious due to the agony of throwing yourself down the stairs. Joe returns hours later to discover Thad had tried to escape again. Filled with rage, he begins stomping and jumping on his chest, shattering his ribs, and he twists his ankles around and around, his foot facing backwards. His legs had begun to swell, a horrific yellowish purple, and Joe would never let up. He kept up the torture. Once again, Joe needed to leave the house, but he had learned from his past and made sure to haul Thad up somewhere he was sure he could never escape, the closet. After Joe left, Thad eventually found a large electric guitar within the closet and broke the door down. He repeats the same process, crawling out of the room and throwing himself down the stairs. Although this time he presses forward, passing out several times and losing complete track of time, the threat of Joe's return looming over him like the most monstrous obelisk. Joe reaches the phone and calls 911. He told them approximately where he was and who had done this to him. Thad was rescued, finally, and Joe Clark was soon arrested. Thad, during his testimony, mentioned that Joe had talked about the torture of a previous boy. He could not recall his last name, but his first name was Chris. Joe Clark was found guilty of both victims and was sentenced to life. Thad amazingly began walking after multiple surgeries, and he was able to speak about this ordeal years later. The display and determination for survival from Thad is admirable and inspirational.